welcome to my show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. Could you just start by sharing your background for people who are unfamiliar with you, your credentials, and how you got to doing what you're doing now?
Yeah, so currently I am a doctor of acupuncture and Chinese medicine, and I also do functional medicine, and I have a standalone clinic in Houston, Texas, where I see patients. I typically work with women, but I do see men as well. My background is in 2001, I graduated with a master's in microbiology with an emphasis in electron microscopy. And shortly after that, I was in the pharmaceutical industry from 2001 to 2010 as a pharmaceutical sales consultant. And then...
How did you end up there in the first place, though? Like, what made you want to major in microbiology?
Well, originally in college,
Was that your undergraduate degree, or was it...
So my undergrad was biology and chemistry, and I was pre-med.
Okay.
And then I had a double major with English literature and world history. And I was spoken to by my family doctor at the time, which was in the mid-90s, kind of gearing me away from the medical system. And so I was like, well, let me do my master's and see where I want to go as far as the trajectory.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved academia. I loved the research. And I just felt like I wanted to continue, get my PhD and do research and be a professor. That was going to be my life. When I was working as a graduate teaching assistant while I was getting my graduate degree, one of my students was actually a pharmaceutical sales rep who was going back to get her master's, and she was taking my class as a prereq. And she was like, you would be an amazing pharmaceutical sales consultant. And I was like, really? And I had no idea about it. And so that was kind of my introductory to maybe I want to try to do something outside and then always come back to academia. But once I got started in the pharmaceutical industry, I stayed there for 9 years.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I want to back up a little bit before we get to the pharmaceutical industry stuff, because I know there's a lot there to cover. Your time studying microbiology, I know you said you specialize in electron microscopy, and I think you had some sort of specialization in virology. Mm-hmm. I think it's no secret what I talk about with respect to those two things. So I just wanted to hear your perspective, and like, to be clear, if someone were to ask me to relay information from my undergraduate degree in systems engineering, I would be able to relay maybe some of it, but I'll just speak for myself. After I realized that I don't really care about that anymore, I did a massive brain dump and I don't remember much of it, like, to be honest. And honestly, there's still some stuff that's pretty useful with that. But point being, I'm not expecting you to know the exact intricate details, et cetera, et cetera. With that being said, you know what I talk about. You know what probably, I'm assuming Dr. Tom Keown, Andy Kaufman, and others talk about. What is your current perspective on virology and electron microscopy?
So
actually, I want to play a video for you first, if that's okay. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Break it down for us. What's the deal with electron microscopes? How do they work?
In order to isolate something in my saliva, I centrifuge it down to whatever this white matter happens to be formed at the bottom of a test tube. And then I have to subject it to an assortment of chemicals that either fix it, which means to dehydrate it, take out all the moisture, stain it in order so that you can see variations in densities, and then continue to dehydrate it and remove any type of impurities. So we're talking about massive heavy metal chemicals. I mean, toxic chemicals that if one drop of that chemical were to get on your skin, you'd be massively, massively sick. And then you're going to cook it in a resin. And that goes into the machine, which is essentially heats up to about 150 degrees, bombards it with thousands of volts of electrons. You only get to see the slice for a short period of time, maybe a couple minutes, because it's melting as you're looking at it.
Look, y'all, we found a virus.
So there's two types of electron microscopes. There's a scanning, and then there's that one. I forgot the name of
transmission
that.
Electron
transmission.
Microscopy?
It's TEM and SEM. So when I did my research, I was working with scanning electron microscopes, and that only looks at the surface of things. So I wasn't working with viruses at that time.
Does it still involve dehydrating?
It does. And then we
something?
coat it with a metal, and I think it was gold that we coated it with. So when I went into grad school, originally I was just so fascinated with infectious disease, and I had just come off of seeing Contagion and reading The Hot Zone.
Like the movie Contagion?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think so. I think that correlates with the timing.
There was multiple movies.
There was a lot all at
that,
once. And again, like that was my dream job, to be in the field and to be working with these deadly infectious diseases. And so that's what prompted me to go into microbiology and potentially work in virology. But like I told you before, when I was in the lab on that first day, I got so bored because all it was just loading electrophoresis gels and waiting for hours upon hours, doing nothing until the data would come in and we would just collect data. Mm-hmm. So it was truly meaningless work. So that day I walked out. And that's when I started working with another professor, and his research was actually in fungus. And so I looked at mycology and the calcium oxalate crystals that are being produced by Aspergillus and some of the fungus that we see in tree matter. And so I was able to look at, from a scanning electron perspective, microscope perspective, the calcium oxalate crystals under the microscope. So my education and background isn't truly in that virology, and I do understand like how it would completely destroy the cell that you're trying to find data on.
Yeah.
Right.
And I wonder, so I've read the work of this guy who's a biologist by the name of Harold Hillman. He's probably one of the biggest critics of cell biology in general. Mm-hmm. And he talks a lot about electron microscopy. And I know this is a common term in amongst micro and molecular biology, producing artifacts, which are just the results of the process rather than something that was actually in the biological material being studied. But what he pushes forth essentially is that you can't know whether what you're looking at, giving the preparation process, whether it's SEM or TEM, is actually representative of the biological material when it's fully intact. And even then, you're still excising tissue from a complex chemical, physical, emotional, spiritual, biological entity. And I've never done any lab work myself, but it just makes sense when he frames it that way. Like there's so many assumptions even to excise tissue from something.
Right.
And then to take that excise tissue and do a bunch of manipulations to it.
Dehydrate it. Yes.
Well, even before you get to the preparation process for electron microscopy, like when it comes to virtually all of cell biology, adding, subtracting fetal bovine serum, which you say is a nutrient-rich source of nourishment for the cells, essentially, which like that's great. But then even the cell lines themselves, like vero cells, human embryonic kidney cells, are kept alive artificially via artificial means, right? And then adding amphotericin B, gentamicin, under the premise that they're just keeping the environment sterile and free of fungal growth and bacterial growth. But those substances are also known to be nephrotoxic, specifically to kidney cells. My point that I'm getting at is like, can we say with any level of certainty that any results on an electron micrograph slide are representative of what's occurring in a complex entity? That's what I wonder, you know?
Yeah, and I don't think we can.
I hope I didn't like push you.
No. No.
I can see where it's like, you're coming in, you trained in this, and I'm very opinionated on this. So I hope it wasn't like.
No, it's not that, because now I have the context of Chinese medicine, which makes so much more sense.
Yeah. Okay. And we'll get to that. Okay. Yeah. I wanted to know your perspective on that, given I saw in your biography that you were trained in that. So, okay. Now I want to touch on the pharmaceutical sales rep stuff and what you saw there. Yeah. So would you agree with this statement that the overwhelming majority of people who get into lab-related research when it comes to health, who become pharmaceutical sales reps, who become MDs, DOs, even in your case, you're an ND, right?
Doctor of acupuncture.
Oh, sorry. You're doctor of acupuncture. I don't know why I thought you were an ND. But who get into literally any field of health. Mm-hmm. are doing that because they think it's the right thing to do and they think they can help people while doing it.
100%.
Yeah. I think that's a very important point to make.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. And then from there, what was your experience?
So I was, over the period of those 9 years that I was working, I worked for 3 large pharmaceutical companies. I will not name them. I have an ND with one of them.
Wow.
Yeah.
That sucks too, because like you signed that contract and it is what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was hired on fresh out of grad school. I was only 21, and I was hired because of my biology degree. Most pharmaceutical sales reps are hired because they have marketing or communications degrees, or they just have these really extroverted personalities. But usually what pharmaceutical companies do is they'll have a team, and like within that team, there's 8 to 12 pharmaceutical sales reps, and we all cover a region. And within that team, there's usually 1 or 2 of us who have a strong science background so that we can look through the data and kind of simplify it for our teammates, so that if any doctors have specific questions, we'll be a resource for them. So that was why I was hired for each company. So the problem with that for the pharmaceutical industry is actually that I could see the corruption unfold right in front of me. Mm-hmm. And when I went to my first training, I didn't notice it so much in the training itself, but once I got out in the field and I was hearing what the doctors were saying about the medications that I was selling, because I was selling at the time psychotropic medications, the feedback I was getting was not the same feedback that the pharmaceutical industry or the company was telling us. And so I think this was even before gaslighting was a term. But we were completely, as sales consultants, being gaslit by the pharmaceutical company and the higher ups, and just saying, well, for instance, with this medication that I was selling, it was causing significant weight gain in patients, 50, 80 pounds within maybe 3 to 4 months. And it was just shooting them into diabetes and metabolic dysfunction. And we were gaslighting the doctors and just saying, well, they just need to have a healthier diet. Instead of them grabbing the chips, they need to grab a bag of carrots. And so it was a lot of placing blame on the patients. The company eventually got sued. And at the time, I think there was like a $420 million payout. But it was still on the market. The whole class of medications is still on the market and being widely used. And then I was also, during that time of working with the company, I think this was probably the most eye-opening for me, especially looking back, is we were being sold, or we were to sell the first non-stimulant ADHD medication. So I worked for a company that had a very prominent antidepressant that was about to lose patent. And so they were trying desperately to find their new blockbuster antidepressant, because they just kind of ruled that arena of medicine. And they kept falling short. And what they did come up with, however, was an SNRI, not an SSRI, so a serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor, that was showing signs of better focus, better clarity, and things like that. So it wasn't quite hitting the depressive marks, but it was helping with focus. The problem with SSRIs and SNRIs is that it takes 6 to 8 weeks for it to kind of take hold and to show efficacy. And so when you're dealing with ADHD, especially in children, parents are going to want immediate results. And that's what we were facing, is the parents were used to stimulants, the pediatricians were used to stimulants, and they didn't want to try a new medication that could potentially work or not work, and we have to wait 6 or 8 weeks to see if it takes hold. So in order to gain more sales, what the pharmaceutical industry did was create a new diagnosis in 2001. Before
How did they do that?
2001, there was no such thing as adult ADHD. So my understanding, and I could be wrong, but my understanding is that they had psychiatrists basically put forth a new criteria for adult ADHD, and it became part of the DSM-4 at the time. So what that did was it opened up a whole new population of patients where we could sell the medication to who may be more apt to taking something that wasn't a stimulant. And as a result, what we had to do as a sales team was not necessarily sell the medication. I mean, obviously that was the end result, but we had to go out and teach doctors this whole new diagnosis that they had never even been aware of, which was
What's it
adult
like
ADHD.
when you sit with a doctor, though, and like you're teaching them this new diagnosis as a sales rep?
There was some pushback. There was a lot of pushback, I remember, from doctors who were like, this could be anybody. And that was the problem, because when they sent out the criteria, it's basically a checklist, just like depression is a checklist. And it's a set of symptoms. And what I think adult ADHD is, now that I work with patients, is nervous system dysregulation.
Of course. Yeah.
For the most part. And so when you give this list of criteria to the general population, the vast majority of adults, and even more so now that we have the cell phones and things like that, which we didn't have back in 2001 as prevalent as we do now, it's going to be a vast majority of the population. In fact, when they gave it to the sales team, I was the only one who did not test positive for adult ADHD. And so it just really was a way to sell more medication. And so there was a lot of pushback from the physicians. And then a lot were like, okay, yeah, this sounds good. And so they just kind of ran with it. So I would say it was kind of a 50-50 thing. And then it eventually caught on. And now it's a whole thing, you know?
And when you would sit down with physicians to share this, okay, in this case, it was a diagnosis, right? Mm-hmm. But then that diagnosis then led to, okay, here's the solution to that. It's a perfect example of the Hegelian dialectic problem reaction solution on a micro level, right? When you would sit down with them, though, how many of them were interested in actually examining the data or the studies that gave rise to the supposed necessity of this medication? Because to add some context to that statement, I gave a presentation on this during the end of COVID that we put out in 2023, so a couple of years ago. I gave a presentation on the pharmaceutical industry, and I don't remember the exact number, but there are a variety of examples where in the development of a new drug, they'll run it through a series of clinical trials, which have a variety of issues. Very rarely are double-blind randomized placebo-controlled trials actually employed. And the metric that they're looking for to determine, quote, effectiveness is even a little bit sketchy in and of itself, right? For example, with the COVID vaccines for Pfizer at the very least, and I'm pretty sure Moderna as well, the results looked for symptom reduction and whether they tested positive or negative on PCR. And the symptoms there's a whole list of like 26 symptoms. So the point is, like, the effectiveness was very vague in what effective even meant.
Always.
Right? And then they're using, what's it called? Relative risk reduction rather than absolute risk reduction too. That's the other huge piece. That being said, even with that, a lot of the times they'll run a series of studies that show no benefit or sometimes show harm. They'll redesign the study and then it shows some level of effectiveness, and that's the one that they'll submit to the FDA for approval.
Yes.
And then the FDA receives 75% of his drug regulatory budget from the same companies that it is regulating. So that just sort of frames the picture. Now, with that being said, on the doctor's side of things, coming from a pharmaceutical sales rep, how many doctors were even interested in looking into everything that I just said there, or at the very least, the evidence behind this new, quote, better drug that they're being given by a sales rep?
Just based on memory, and granted that was 24 years ago, I don't remember any of the doctors. They took it as is, like, this is new criteria for the DSM-4, and, you know, we can start giving these patients medications to help. The only one I really remember getting pushback was only because he was older. He was in his 60s, I think. And he took offense to it because he was like, well, based on this, I have adult ADHD and I've learned to live with it. And in a way, it's a gift for me, you know, and like, I can think more quickly and I can do all of these things and I can, you know, multitask. And I'm like, okay. But yeah, I really don't remember a lot of doctors wanting that data.
When I interviewed Dr. Andy Kaufman, he and I sort of went through this, that there's a lot of assumptions from the general public, especially patients of general physicians, that the physicians themselves are doing deep dives when it comes to the research that is being published. And that's simply not true, at least in Andy's experience, and a variety of other MDs, DOs, RNs, and other people that I've talked to in the medical profession. Like there's this huge assumption that they are diving into the data themselves in order to prescribe this drug, but it's simply not true.
They don't have time, number one. Yeah. And the ones who do truly have interest, I remember, so we would always have to categorize our doctors based on their personality. And so you had a handful of those that were truly interested in the scientific data and research. And with them, you couldn't really, for whatever reason, they didn't want a dialogue. They just wanted you to leave behind the study. And then, as you say, the studies are corrupt in and of themselves in how they do statistics. And that's what I saw firsthand in all of the companies that I worked with. And it was, at first, I thought it was just the first company. And then when I went to the second company, that's when I really saw during the training that the math wasn't mathing. And I was able to see it in only one other person in the whole, maybe 200 of us who were all new pharmaceutical sales consultants, had the background to understand that the statistics wasn't making sense. And I even brought it up to my trainers. And I was showing them the math and like how it should have been done. And I got called in and basically said that, you know, if you continue to question the data that we have set forth, then you will lose your job. So I remember calling a girlfriend of mine who was also in the pharmaceutical industry and crying on the phone to her. And I was sitting in the hallway of the hotel room where I was, you know, the training was going on. And I just was bawling to her. And I was like, I thought it was our company, but it's the industry. Like I'm seeing it across the industry now. And I know that we as pharmaceutical sales reps are not getting the full picture and an honest picture. We're just mouthpieces of what the pharmaceutical industry or company wants us to say. So I saw it through the gaslighting. I saw it through the manipulation and the statistics. And I guess it was a blessing in disguise that I was able to have that education to understand how it was being manipulated. And yeah, so there's the corruption is ubiquitous in so many ways.
Was there anything else that you saw specifically other than like the manipulation of data? And then of course being called, I mean, that in and of itself is enough to be like, okay, this is super sketchy. The inventing of new diagnoses.
New diagnoses.
When you talked with your colleagues, what was that like bringing it up to them? Because you said in one group at this one company, there was 200 of you and only 2 of you were like, hey, what is this?
Yeah. And the other one who was aware of it, he had been in the pharmaceutical industry longer than I had. And he was like, you cannot bring this up. You like, I know you're right. And I know where you're coming from, but you will lose your career. And I was like, okay. And I was young at the time. I was completely naive. I was sold on the fact that medicine was here to heal people. The longer I was in the industry, the more these quote unquote blockbuster drugs, they were just selling it for profit. It was there was never in it for the benefit of the patient. Eventually what got me out of pharmaceuticals, which unfortunately it did take me 9 years to get out, because
if no one around you is questioning and you're looking to your left and your right and like you feel that something's wrong, but no one else around you is, and it's like, oh, maybe you probably had a lot of cognitive dissonance. Like, am I wrong?
I'm like, am I the one? Yeah. But it was the very last company that I worked with, which I only stayed with for about 18 months, where it was a biotech company. And so I was selling infusions. And there was a lot of hidden data because we were launching a new medication for osteoporosis. There was a lot of hidden data about its association with causing bone cancers. And so that was hidden. And that was something that me and my team members were like, are we just going to let this slide? And it would be brought up in team meetings or in company meetings from the sales consultants. And they would just gaslight us and say it was so minimal, when now, in fact, we know that it isn't. And eventually, I got really bullied out of that job to the point where my boss was like verbally abusive towards me, and he ended up spitting on me. It was crazy.
Like intentionally, or just because he was yelling so much?
No, it was intentional. And so it was like one of those things where, you know how the universe is like tapping you on the head and it's like, hey, it's time for you to leave.
Yeah.
And then it's like smacking you in the face and it's like, time to leave. And it's like, okay, what do we have to do? What do we have to do? Okay, we're going to get this horrific man to be your boss and he's going to just drive you out. And that's exactly what happened.
Literally spit on you.
And I was just like, and I'm done. And I walked out, got in my car and drove home. And within 2 hours, they had taken my car, they had taken my phone, my computer. My oldest daughter at the time was only 18 months and I was a single mom. And I was like, crap, what am I going to do? And I had to literally walk next door to my next door neighbor's house, use their phone, call my dad and say, I just quit my job. And then that's what kind of brought me to Chinese medicine. And I was like, I don't know anything else other than
allopathy.
That. Yeah.
How did you land at Chinese medicine though?
So my favorite quote one of my favorite quotes is the one by Steve Jobs, where it's like, you can never connect the dots until you look backwards. Mm-hmm. And so rewind, I was still in pharmaceutical sales and I was probably maybe 6 years into it. And I was also into astrology and I was taking astrology classes weekly in Houston. And there was an astrology convention in Austin or outside of Austin. And so I went there and I met this man who was the president of AOMA, which is the acupuncture school in Austin. It was at the time. And he was telling me, he was like, you really need to consider doing Chinese medicine and acupuncture. I think you would be an excellent practitioner. And I remember literally rolling my eyes at the idea. I was like, the thought of putting acupuncture needles in order to elicit a physiological response, my left brain was just like, no.
Microbiology, electron microscopy, virology,
yes.
Pharmaceutical sales.
Yeah. And I was just like, no. But for whatever reason, that meeting with that man impacted me and it stayed there. And so when I left everything and I was just, I had no idea what I was going to do. And I remembered that conversation that I had with him. And I got him my dad's car that he had given me by that time. And I put my daughter in her car seat and we drove to the acupuncture school in Houston. They were enrolling for their fall semester that day. And they were like, is that what you're here for? And I go, sure. I honestly had no idea it was a 5-year program. I was like, I'm very studious. I'm academically inclined. I'll breeze through this. I had no idea what all it entailed, what acupuncture was. I didn't know that it was such an extensive program. And so I enrolled and then everything just came to me. It just flowed through and it made so much sense. And I ended up finishing the program in 3 years. I had my second daughter while I was there. And I graduated with a 4.0 valedictorian and it just, everything clicked at that point. It was like whatever happened, it drove me to that point and it was just meant to be, for sure.
Epic. Most healthcare today operates on an outdated mechanistic model, treating the body like a battlefield rather than a self-healing system. You wait months for an appointment only to receive a rush diagnosis that labels you rather than truly understanding your unique health. Even in holistic health, many practitioners rely on endless lab tests and supplement protocols, addressing symptoms instead of the root cause. And the result, another prescription or supplement regimen that merely suppresses or masks symptoms rather than facilitating true healing, whether the imbalance was physical, emotional, energetic, or a mix of all three. And that's why Dr. Tom Keown co-founded the New Biology Clinic, to offer something radically different. As one of the most respected natural health doctors in the world, Dr. Keown has spent decades challenging conventional medicine and advancing a deeper understanding of human biology, water, and natural health. His work isn't just about rejecting the mainstream, it's about offering a more truthful, biologically coherent approach for healing. The New Biology Clinic recognizes that health isn't about fighting disease, it's about restoring balance. You're not a diagnosis, you're an individual with a unique story, and healing should honor that. With virtual consultations available worldwide, the clinic offers a flat-rate monthly membership that gives you direct access to practitioners who take the time to actually listen. Members also get exclusive health live streams, a resource library, and live sessions covering everything from biofield tuning and breathwork to movement and meditation, all designed to support whole body healing. And if you're not ready for a membership, you can book a one-time appointment, sign up for an enrichment-only membership for the healing modalities alone, or schedule a free connection session with one of the care team members to see how the New Biology Clinic can help in your specific situation. This isn't about keeping you dependent on doctors. It's about making you sovereign over your health. Head to newbiologyclinic.com and use code THEWAYFORWARD, and that's spelled The Way, F-O-R-W-A-R-D, for $50 off account activation, or just head to the show notes for more info. If you're a member of The Way Forward, email hello@thewayforward.com for $150 off. Your body already knows how to heal, and New Biology Clinic helps you remember. There's a recent poll that I put out on all my social media channels, and 95% of people responded that they're struggling to find their health and freedom community in person. And don't get me wrong, these platforms, these devices that you're listening to or watching this podcast on right now are great for helping to disseminate information, helping us, find like-minded people to validate us, but they are not a replacement for real in-person community. At the core of our new community platform is a powerful, easy-to-use map helping you to instantly connect with like-hearted, like-minded community, including men and women, farms, schools, practitioners of all types, and other businesses near you. The platform also includes groups, social functions, messaging, and Platinum members also get access to our content library with footage from all of our in-person and virtual events like Confluence and the end of COVID, as well as breathwork sessions, Qigong sessions, member Q&As, and also member community calls. So if you'd like to support this podcast and support our mission of helping people to connect hyper-locally in person, and also obviously support yourself in the process, go to the show notes or just go to thewayforward.com/join. And again, the way forward is spelled the way, FWRD.com/join to become a member today. Help us build the way forward for mankind. It's funny because I'm super interested in Chinese medicine. I practice Qigong myself, which is in the same area, let's say. My mentor is a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner, and yet I've not done one episode tailored towards Chinese medicine, which is wild. So Dr. Edith, who I talk about like every other episode, is my mentor. She's a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner. Never interviewed her about Chinese medicine. So I guess like my first question is, coming in from your background, which was steeped in allopathic medicine and the Western pharmaceutical suppress symptoms, mask symptoms that then cause other symptoms where you're on endless amounts of pharmaceuticals that is actually not healthy or addressing the root cause in any sort of way whatsoever. Not saying allopathic medicine doesn't have any benefits. Emergency and acute care, it can be great, of course. But I'm also learning that there are a variety of things we think is a medical emergency worth going to a hospital that are not. Dr. Andy Kaufman gave a fantastic presentation at Anarchapulco in 2024 that was called Anarcho Medicine. All the things you think you need to go to the hospital for that you don't actually need to go to the hospital for that can be treated naturally at home. Now, setting that aside, coming from that background, what was Chinese medicine school like for you?
So it was my own wake-up call. I was 31. Like I said, I was a single mom. My oldest daughter was 18 months at the time. I had been prescribed about 7 medications at that time. So I had a chronic history of allergies, insomnia, eczema. I had severe depression that was diagnosed when I was 16. And so I was on a myriad of medications. And
were you on any psychotropic medications?
I was, so I was on SSRIs. I was prescribed every SSRI and SNRI because I was considered a failure upon them. I learned later exactly why I was a failure, and we can get to that in the functional medicine aspect of it. But because I was considered a failure for the medications, they ended up diagnosing me not only with clinical depression, they said that I had bipolar 2 because I was non-responsive to the medications that were being given. And so with the diagnosis of bipolar, I was given mood stabilizers. And the mood stabilizers, and I don't know how deep you want to get into this.
I'm happy to. I mean, this is a topic for me that hits really close to home just in general in psychotropic medications, benzos and SSRIs, because I've witnessed my own mother on them.
Yeah.
And that was dark. But then she had the intuition to realize that the psychotropic medications were just making her worse, but didn't have the resources to know how to get off them and didn't know how detrimental it was to cut cold turkey. And that's what she did. And so that was even worse. But just the whole experience over the course of 10 years, I mean, my mom had akathisia, was in and out of psych wards, seeing apparitions, up late at night, up until like, you know, not sleeping for nights on end, seeing things throughout the house, sitting in the mirror in her bathroom, wide-eyed like this, obsessively picking her face, multiple suicide attempts. It was one of the darkest things you can witness in another human being, let alone your own mother. So
actually I had a similar experience. So the doctors decided to give me mood stabilizers, and the first one that they gave me, by that night of my first dose, I had severe tremors. And they were just like really heavy. They weren't like this. It was like my body was just convulsing. And I was like, okay, well, that one's not great. So then they gave me something else. Whatever it was they gave me the second time, again, I was only on it for a short period of time. But the first or second night that I took it, I was living, this was in my early 20s. So thankfully, I did not have children at this time. And I was living in a 3-story condo in Houston. My roommate was a friend of mine who was like an ex-football player from A&M. And I'm upstairs on the 3rd floor. He's on the 2nd floor. And I started having the sensation of being risen out of bed. And then I was dragged out of bed and thrown onto the floor.
Did you ever see any figures?
So I don't remember seeing figures, but the only way I could describe it was like, I couldn't have made myself do that.
Yeah.
And so I remember being terrified. I ran downstairs. Thankfully, his girlfriend wasn't staying with us that night and he was alone. I got in bed with him and I was just like, I'm not going back up into my room. So what I did the next night was, I was like, there must be something wrong with my house. I didn't attribute it to the medication I was on. So the second night I went to my dad's house because I was like, something happened at my house. And my dad's very religious and spiritual. And so what he did, he let me sleeping in his room and then he slept on the couch. When I was at his house, what had happened was, maybe it was that night where I did feel a dark energy. And again, I was raised a little bit from the bed, but this time I was swirled with the bed, like above. And so I remember holding really tightly from the sheets because I didn't want to be thrown down again. And for whatever reason, I ended up stopping the medication and the events stopped. So it was a very short period of time where I was on those mood stabilizers. And so looking back, I was like, okay, well, that's what caused it. Fast forward to just recently, one of my friends just lost her husband. And while he was in the hospital, he was under a lot of medication. And he could feel, after being given a dose of a certain medication, that an evil spirit had come into the room.
It's so wild. The reason that I asked that is because my mom would always describe, and this typically gives me chills, seeing very specifically this shadowy figure that had a wide brimmed hat and a trench coat on, but you couldn't make out any facial features or any, or any like what they looked like other than it was just a shadowy figure, right? And the only thing you could make out were its eyes, and that's it. And the figure used to come up to her, clap in her face, and then run away, or just stand and stare at her in the corner of the room. And she described this repeatedly. What's wild, though, is other people who had come off of benzos in this Facebook group that she was in described seeing the exact same thing with a wide brimmed hat figure that stands in the corner of the room and watches her. I don't know what to make of it. I've thought of multiple ideas, like even the possibility of, in the creation process of these things, like putting some sort of dark energetic hex on them for the people that consume them, whose fields are open to receive that thing, and then they are, for lack of a better term, possessed or being haunted by or tormented by astral entities that are malicious, right? To maybe it's just a hallucination that is specific to this drug. I tend to think it's the former, based on my esoteric and spiritual understandings now, and what the physical results are for most people of taking pharmaceuticals. You would think that would also reflect metaphysically too. So
yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
it was undoubted. It was so real, and it was absolutely linked. And then after talking with my own patients and other people's experiences, I'm not the only one that has felt or witnessed or experienced the darkness of it. But yeah, it was really bad.
Yeah.
So by the time I got into Chinese medicine school, I was not on the mood stabilizers, but I still was on Effexor at the time, which is probably the medication within the SSRI, SNRI antidepressant that I think has the most side effects, and it's the hardest to get off of. It's very painful to get off of it. And I had been on them for, at that time, maybe 15 years. And so I used acupuncture and herbs to wean myself off of it. And luckily I did really well, but a lot of people, they don't understand like the titration process or how important it is to really titrate slowly because of the damage that's being done to the nervous system and the brain, et cetera.
You say titrate, is that similar like tapering?
Tapering. Tapering down.
Yeah.
So I used Chinese medicine for my own healing. I was like, well, if I'm going to become a practitioner, then I need to do this for myself. And so by the time I graduated, I was no longer on any medication. And then fast forward to a few years later, I started doing some testing on myself because I was like covered in a rash. And I just found out that I have a really severe sensitivity to gluten, and I'm on that celiac spectrum. And it was manifesting as the rash and severe depression, because with gluten, it affects four tissues primarily: the gut, the thyroid, the skin, the nervous system, and the brain. And so many people who have depression, anxiety, OCD, etc., have a sensitivity to gluten where it just causes inflammation of the brain. And this whole idea of depression being caused by serotonin or neurotransmitter issues, I think it's just the pharmaceuticals' way of saying, this is what we have a medication for, so this is what we're going to say, this is how depression works. But it's not the case. I mean, there's more evidence to show that it's really inflammation of the brain. And so when I got gluten out of my diet, all of a sudden, like, all of this stuff started healing, and I no longer had the depression and all of these other things that I had been diagnosed with since childhood.
Incredible. Yeah. It's cool that you use yourself as like a case study to like prove the concept of Chinese medicine. I
always do.
Yeah. So could we get into some of like the foundations and basics of Chinese medicine? And I guess a question before we get there though, based on your assessment and knowledge of Chinese medicine at this point, how much of the schools have been, or how much have most of the schools been infiltrated, let's say, or skewed or altered to varying degrees by the allopathic mindset. Because I've interviewed a variety of chiropractors, and I, in my own research, because I was considering going to chiropractic school for a while, started really looking at this, and there's only like 3 chiropractic universities in the world really at this point. Don't quote me on that. From my understanding though, Life University, both locations, and then also this one chiropractic school in Spain are like the 3 ones that really still teach the foundations of chiropractic. The other ones have been infiltrated to varying degrees by allopathic medicine. It's like trying to appeal to allopathic leaning people, which inevitably corrupts the initial teachings of chiropractic. So what's your perspective on that when it comes to Chinese medicine?
I can only speak to the school that I went to, and I would say that yes, that's accurate, because they really wanted to be affiliated with the Houston Medical Center, which is, one of the biggest medical centers in the world and most renowned medical systems in the world. And so they have affiliation with like Methodist and MD Anderson. So they were touting the biomedicine aspect of everything. I will say, however, that I was lucky in the sense that when I did go to school there, and it's not that way anymore, but when I did go to school there, that 90%, or at least the majority of the professors were all doctors of Chinese medicine from China.
That's cool.
And that makes a real difference, because I do feel like the Chinese medicine aspect of it, although we were really, there's basically 3 aspects of Chinese medicine that we learn. We learn the acupuncture, the Chinese medicine, and then the biomedicine, because we can't do this medicine without some context of Western medicine, anatomy, physiology, etc. And so I would say that they did a good job, with teaching us a good foundation.
Okay, cool. And what were the foundations that were taught to you, going back to the original question?
So
that's a loaded question, but
it is.
Just full traditional Chinese medicine 101, let's say.
So meridians, acupuncture points, qi, yin, yang, the functions of the organ systems, etc. The interrelationship of the organs themselves. And so what we're really taught in Chinese medicine is that we are truly holistic, and you cannot look at anything individually, and everything is a pattern. And so that's really the beauty of Chinese medicine, is seeing how heartbreak can lead to recurring UTIs, or trauma in childhood can lead to impotence in adulthood, things like that. So it's really amazing to see the patterns. What I really like actually is, I don't know if you've heard of this book. It's called The Spark in the Machine, and it's written by Dr. Daniel Keown, and he is a medical doctor out of the UK, but he's also a doctor of Chinese medicine. And so he's kind of demystified qi and acupuncture, because I think that because there's not true understanding of how acupuncture and Chinese medicine works, then it becomes like placed into this woo-woo witchcraft type of, it's just a placebo effect or something like that. But he really goes into why acupuncture works, what qi really is, what the meridians really are, and what we've been overlooking. So I tend to believe and kind of focus on what he has been teaching. And that is, everything is explained in embryology. And so the folding of the embryo as it grows, these ley lines become the fascia, and the fascia is the meridian system. And that's where the bioelectricity is moving, right? And the bioelectricity is the qi. And the acupuncture points are where these bundles kind of sit, and where you can most activate that bioelectricity and send signals. And it's actually shown that this bioelectricity that moves through the fascia moves more quickly than nerves. And so that's why I could needle someone on the foot and their headache is, goes away in like a matter of seconds. And they're like, what did you do? You didn't even touch my head with a needle, So it's all this it's this beautiful web of electricity that we're literally tapping into with acupuncture points.
Have you seen the video? And there's probably a variety of videos related to this, but I came across this video on Instagram of a guy. I don't know if he was a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner himself, but he was taking some sort of device that measures electrical output on the body and was showing, had this chart up of this, like the primary meridian points on the human body, and was taking this device and holding it over those points and showing that they had, I don't know if this is the appropriate electrical term, but increased electrical potential in those areas, which was super interesting to me. And going back to your point on it's considered woo-woo because we don't yet understand the mechanisms of what goes on. We were having a conversation with my members in my membership the other day on this exact topic, like the human being's very materialist based mindset, coming from that perspective, desire to know how things work and be so sure of how things work makes it so we have a higher capacity to be hijacked by those who come up with, whether intentional or not, false premises on how things work and then adopt those from a very fear-based lens.
Yeah, and we see that in the situation, and this is my personal opinion. I'm not stating the opinion of all acupuncturists, but how physical therapists have hijacked acupuncture and renamed it as dry needling when they're just using really intense needling techniques to release trigger points or something like that. We also do that in acupuncture, but we also have a very clear understanding. I mean, you cannot graduate with a degree in acupuncture in less than 3 years. I mean, it is extensive knowledge. And then it was 4 to 5 years for us, because in Texas, we are also certified herbalists. And so, yeah, they've completely hijacked it. And the way that they've gotten away with it is by redefining acupuncture and saying that in Chinese medicine, acupuncture is defined as the qi and, the elicitation of, qi. And so they keep it really mystical. And then they redefine it in their terms physiologically and say that there's a science and evidence-based. So
basically what you're saying is they're relegating the Chinese medicine approach to it as woo-woo.
Yes.
And then framing it from a physical therapy or athletic training perspective as this is the science-based approach.
Science-based and evidence-based. And so, yeah.
Got it.
And so they're not honoring it. And that's why there's, from my understanding, because I was a huge advocate when I first became a licensed acupuncturist, I was a huge advocate on not allowing the physical therapists and chiropractors to do acupuncture because their training is so minimal and they're teaching themselves for the most part. And for some of them, they're just taking a weekend course. And so they're not honoring the medicine and they're not understanding the medicine. And so now they're using it inappropriately and they're causing harm. And so most of the issues or adverse events that have happened through acupuncture needles has come from dry needling, not from licensed acupuncturists.
Interesting. Can we talk about this a little bit actually? Because, I was a professional athlete at one point in time. I had shoulder surgery, biceps tenodesis, rotator cuff repair. So I've actually looked into whether I could get that reversed. And at this point, I can't find anything saying I can, which is really frustrating because knowing what I know now, I would have never had surgery, but nonetheless, I did. And when I was playing professional handball, and for those who are unaware, I'm not talking about the handball where you hit the ball against the wall. I'm talking about like the game where it looks like water polo, except for it's on land, or soccer, except for you're throwing the ball rather than kicking the ball. It's an Olympic sport. U.S. hasn't qualified since 1996. That being said, my throwing mechanisms became off after my surgery, and I just couldn't get the mobility in my shoulder that I needed to throw well. And so before almost every other practice and pretty much every game, I would get dry needling done in order to loosen up my shoulder. Now, I recognize in hindsight that was a perfect example of just addressing the symptoms temporarily, because the tightness would always come back and come roaring back after I would, quote, loosen up the muscles with dry needling. Based on your perspective, can the same effects be achieved, if not better, using acupuncture that I achieved, again, temporarily when using dry needling?
So I think that it depends. 95% of the time when I treat my patients, I use distal needling, and I use either a 1/2 inch or a 1 inch needle, which is very tiny. And what distal needling does is there are certain points that will correlate to the area that I'm treating. So if I have somebody who's coming in for shoulder issues, I always start at the lower leg. There's points
on the same side?
No, not necessarily.
Okay. Because I tend to have, like, I'm sure you're familiar loosely with the fascial lines. Like I have, after my surgery, I've had right hip, right knee, right ankle issues that I've done a lot of myofascial release work and have done some like repatterning of my movements. I'm doing functional patterns right now, actually. And I feel so much better than I used to, but I tend to have issues on the opposite side of my body, on the lower side. Yeah.
So it depends on the patient. And so usually there are certain areas that are going to correspond to the area that I'm treating. So if, let's say it's your shoulder, then I'm going to palpate the areas on your lower leg to see which is the most tender, and I will needle that. There's also specific points like a spleen 6 or stomach 38, which are automatically indicated to treat shoulder pain. And sometimes it's effective on the same side, and sometimes it's effective on the opposite side. It's also, by doing the distal needling, anytime I'm treating a larger joint, I'll do the acupuncture on a smaller joint, because our body is like a microcosms of each other. So same thing with auricular acupuncture. There's over 100 points on the ear that correspond to different things. So I'll always do like ankle points, and that will loosen. So as I'm doing these points, I'll have the patient move the arm, and almost always we're going to get a change in, range of motion and a decrease in pain. And it's pretty quick. Sometimes if there is significant tightness and knots, then it is beneficial to go in and release those, but you certainly don't have to do it so aggressively. And then I also like cupping too, because cupping is like reverse massage, where you're pulling the fascia and the muscle, and it's releasing the tension by also adding oxygenated blood flow to the area. And so it's healing.
Yeah. So correct me, actually just share with me, what is the general premise and mechanism of action as you understand it for acupuncture? So
based on Dr. Keown, which is what I think is accurate, is when you use acupuncture, it is signaling biochemical reactions through the fascia and intercellularly information. And so every single acupuncture point can elicit a different response based on what the patient is needing at that time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So is it more about, I'm just going to play with this for a second. Is it more about drawing blood to the area, or is it about releasing tension in the area, or is it something entirely different than that?
My understanding is that it's activating the fascia to send the signals.
So it could be releasing like calcifications in the fascia, essentially, in that area.
Right. It's a biochemical reaction.
Okay.
And so, yeah, we avoid blood. The best acupuncturist will take needles out and there's no bleeding.
Yeah, and I didn't mean like literally like trying to draw blood out, but I'm saying by causing a micro injury, if you want to call it that for lack of a better term, it's naturally drawing healing to that area.
That's true.
Or is it more about like, I'm just trying to think on the deep level based on my very, very, very limited understanding of fascia, but pretty good understanding of fourth phase water and like hydration and what true hydration is. Cellularly, what is happening with an acupuncture needle in that point? Because like you have these energetic meridian lines where chi they're like nodal points for chi, if you want to call them that. Would you say that's accurate? Okay, so then you're using acupuncture at that points to draw more what to that area?
I don't know if it's drawing anything to that area necessarily. Okay. I think it's about sending signals.
Okay, sending signals to that area. Okay.
Yeah, and it's sending signals. So for instance, there's a point on the lower leg that we almost ubiquitously use for women and hormonal issues. So why are we doing it there versus on top of the ovaries or around the navel? You know? So it's connected to the meridian. It's on the meridian that's associated with that organ system.
Okay. So then the meridian system.
Those are our pathways, our highways.
Right.
Yes.
For chi.
Yes.
And they don't necessarily always correspond with the joints or the organs that are right underneath that specific meridian. How was that determined? Like, I'm assuming it's thousands of years ago.
How was it determined? That I don't know. But what the book, The Spark and the Machine, goes into is it's like, how did they know all of this information and in such immaculate detail when you look at embryology and you look at how we were created and the ley lines that are formed, and that's exactly what those meridians are. And like the same tissue that forms the adrenals, the kidneys, the reproductive system, the brain, those all are the same tissue embryologically. That is the kidneys in Chinese medicine, because the kidneys rule the actual kidneys, the adrenals, the brain, etc. So I don't know how they could have known it. Just this amazing innate intelligence that they learned over time, but it's truly like, it's so far ahead of what Western medicine is that it's like, when is Western medicine going to, number one, honor it, and number two, just try to catch up? Yeah,
it makes a lot of sense. It's another perfect example of like, quote, modern science beginning to, quote, discover. I say that in a very, I won't say smug, but like in a very passive aggressive way. That which ancient civilizations had already determined and had already had tremendous success with over the course of thousands of years, possibly. Yeah. From your understanding, is there a difference between traditional Chinese medicine and what's called classical Chinese medicine?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
There's a traditional Chinese medicine, and then there's a 5 element.
Okay.
Which is a little bit more esoteric, which we didn't really learn.
Have you dived into that at all yourself?
I've had a practitioner in Houston, and it was amazing.
Was it, when you say 5 element, are we talking about like air, earth, water?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Awesome. What did that entail?
So still acupuncture, it's just a different method. And I feel like they work more on a spiritual level versus on a physical level. So they're about, I forgot the name of the treatment. It's something about dragons, but they'll do a treatment down the back, and it's similar to what we use in traditional Chinese medicine, which is a second line back shu treatment, where there's two lines along the back, one that runs along the spine, and then one that runs a little bit outside along the spine. So it's the inner bladder and then the outer bladder points. And the inner bladder points are correlated to the actual organs, the physiological organs. So lung, pericardium, heart, all the way down digestion, bladder and kidneys, etc. And then the second line is associated with the emotions associated with those organs. And so what we can do to clear emotions, or to clear what some may consider evil chi, is to use those second line points. And you can have really profound effects of emotional clearing. And going back kind of to the esoteric of what I felt when I was taking the medications, I have felt entities leave people as I'm needling those areas.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I want to get into now the correspondence with certain emotional conflicts, let's say, in their relation to specific organs in Chinese medicine?
Yeah. So Chinese medicine, it's so poetic. It really is, the way in which everything is described. And when we look at Chinese medicine and pathogenic factors, one of the major pathogenic factors is the internal, for internal illness, is dysregulation of emotions. So all emotions are neutral. They're neither good nor bad, but when they linger too long, then they can directly have negative impact on the organ by which it's associated with. So for instance, the lungs are associated with grief, despair, depression. So anytime there's been significant grief or loss, the lungs do not handle it well. And so they get weaker over time. And you can see this in patients who have like really quiet voice. They have breathlessness and things like that. So it can physically impact their lungs.
Or things like PCOS or even lung cancer then too.
Yeah. And like weakness in their immune system, because the lungs are also the immune system.
Have you looked into Dr. Gerald Pollack's paper on the premise that we don't actually breathe oxygen, we breathe charge?
No.
You'd be so fascinated by that, because it especially with your understanding of qi, you'll see how it all relates back. It's less about us breathing oxygen.
Yes.
It's more about us cleaving negative charge off of oxygen molecules.
Yes.
It's
and
fascinating.
This acupuncture and Chinese medicine correlates so beautifully with mitochondrial function and health. And I'm currently taking a course with Justine Stenger, Stenger. She's amazing. I'll send you some of her stuff. You should probably have her here.
Okay.
And I don't know enough to go into the details of everything, but that's something that you would have a really good discussion with her about. It's all about like supporting mitochondrial health. She knows the ins and outs of the biochemistry and the charge. But as she was teaching the class, I was like, this is all Chinese medicine. This is what acupuncture does. And so many people are not stepping into using it because they're looking at supplements and herbs and protocols. But going back to the organs, so the lungs are associated with grief. The heart is actually associated with joy. They say joy, but it's really mania. So it's like an excess of joy.
Interesting.
And the heart is associated with the Shen. So have you heard of like the Shen?
Yeah.
I'm sure in Qigong, right?
Yeah.
So people can have a healthy Shen where they're vibrant, and you can just tell that
Shen, correct me if I'm wrong, is more about like your spirit, right?
It's your spirit and it's your mindset. It's kind of your, what's behind the eyes type of thing. And you can see it through the eyes. And so when they become manic, and you can see it in their Shen. So it can be a disturbance of Shen or mania. So that can impair the heart and cause heart weakness.
Would that also include the category, like when you talk about joy, could that be determined as like overexcitement or stress, just like too much?
So I think overexcitement and stress would probably be more of a kidney issue because of the anxiety, anxiousness / fear. When we see somebody who has a weakened heart, oftentimes, have you ever I'm sure you have, you've spoken to somebody who always laughs after they talk?
Yes.
Or they laugh in really inappropriate situations?
Yes.
Yes, that's somebody who has weak heart. And so it's usually something that we can treat with acupuncture and Chinese herbs. So next would be the spleen and stomach. And the spleen in Chinese medicine is our earth element, and it's our digestion, and it's our metabolism. So it could be our digestion, our thyroid, things like that. Worry and overthinking, ruminating, that weakens the spleen. And so if we have a weak spleen, vice versa, then we can tend to become overthinkers and worry.
So they work.
They work opposite. So it's like, what came first, the chicken or the egg?
Got it.
Was there a direct impact to the physical organ, or was there too much of that emotion that's impacting the organ?
You know, I like that, because I said this on a recent episode. I did like a roundtable episode, and I talked about, because I've said before on my episode on this podcast that I think the overwhelming majority of health-related issues have an emotional component to them, if not all of them at some level. And that being said, the more we're living amongst nature, the more quickly we can resolve those
Yes.
emotional issues we have. And I like give the example of the Hadza people in Africa, or the Kogi people of Colombia, or the Kero people of Peru, any other indigenous culture. I highly doubt they even had a conceptual framework for, or a thought of something like chronic depression or chronic anxiety or anything like this, because when you're living in community, especially with a lot of the evidence coming out now surrounding how community and healthy relationships is one of the most important markers of longevity, just makes so much sense. But also living amongst nature and less exposed to the variety of man-made toxins and industrial pollutants and non-native EMFs and all the things that we have now, seed oils, like the ultra-processed foods, et cetera, I think your body is a much more clear vessel, which makes it easier to process those emotions. So going back to your point that they work in like, they're sort of
interchangeable.
Interchangeably, where if you have a lung issue, that could make you more susceptible to grief. Or if you have a tremendous amount of grief that is unprocessed, you will then have lung issues. Is that kind of like...
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. The fourth organ is liver, and liver is associated with frustration, anger, irritability. We see this a lot in women who have PMS. So when they get really irritable before their cycle, I already know that they have liver congestion or liver qi stagnation. So that's
like
something.
You see that very clear pattern?
Oh, yeah. I mean, if they have significant irritability and it's right before they're about to start, then we already know the pattern. It's
so then
liver qi stagnation.
You work on their meridians related to that specific point, and it helps release that. Do they have a release of anger sometimes too, coinciding it?
Usually not. So with liver controls the smooth flow of qi. So it's kind of the governor of just keeping everything running smoothly. And so when we get frustrated or angry, it halts that smoothness. And so what acupuncture does is it just kind of creates those unblocks, and it kind of allows things to go through. So it's not really an exacerbation of it. Typically, it's usually just that getting everything moving more smoothly. And so it evens out their mood to where they're like, oh yeah, like I didn't even know my cycle was going to come. Like I had no indication. That's a healthy cycle. We don't want somebody to have PMS. We don't want somebody to have a lot of pain or, dysmenorrhea or anything.
So the liver, say again what the liver is related to qi.
Liver is responsible for the smooth flow of qi.
Smooth flow of qi. Okay, that makes a lot of sense given that the liver is associated with, or one of the primary functions of the liver is detoxification. And then what are the kidneys in relation to qi? Because I know there's a lot of focus on the kidneys when it comes to qigong, but also in Chinese medicine.
Kidneys are my favorite.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's always, for me, it's the thing that most of us are deficient in, and it's the thing that if we can just focus on that, we are going to really see massive benefit. And it's the key to aging and living a vital, healthy life into our older years. So kidneys are, from an emotional perspective, associated with our willpower. They're pretty much interchangeably with our adrenal function, but they also so kidneys govern the brain as well. So in Chinese medicine, kidneys are responsible for our growth, our development, healthy bones, and our willpower to keep moving forward.
That all sounds incredible. And what are they specifically to qi? Like, how do they relate to qi?
Well, every organ has a qi.
Yeah.
So
because you're talking about how the liver is related to the smooth. I forget what you said again, but the
smooth flow.
The smooth flow of qi. How would the kidneys relate to qi?
I don't know.
The reason I'm asking that is because from my understanding now, kidneys are less about waste filtration and more about blood filtration than anything.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm just like thinking along those lines, especially as it relates to willpower. I don't know. I'll have to think on it a little bit more. Because I'm like, what I'm doing in my mind right now is I'm like taking the framework of my understanding of the organs, both physically and metaphysically, and seeing how that checks out. Not that my assessment is correct whatsoever, but it like just makes sense with the liver being detoxification, how that ensures this smooth flow of qi, right? And then like, I don't know, something about kidneys being more focused on blood filtration, also having to do with our willpower. I mean, I know the heart, given that it's not a pump and is a vortexing device, I look at that as like vortexing our soul and imprinting our soul onto our blood. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what I'm getting at, but I'm just thinking on that. Maybe those are listening or watching, you could marinate on that too, because you know that I tend to do this on episodes like this. I did this on another episode when it came to fascia with Brooke McPoyle, where I'm just like sitting here coming up with the framework in my head on how all this works. Not that it's accurate. Sorry. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So, and kidneys are responsible for our aging. And what I've found is that just by our lifestyles, especially over maybe the last 10 to 20 years, we are aging ourselves so rapidly. So when we think about kidney chi, so when we talk about an organ's chi, we're talking about the function of it as well. So not just the organ, but the function of it and what it does, what it performs. So when we think about that, when we're born, we're given, the way I look at it, even though kidneys are a water element, I think of us being born and we're given this flame of life. And we know that our kids are running around and they have this boisterous flame.
Yeah.
And then as we get older, that flame gets less and less vibrant. And with the way in which our modern world is, with all of the things that are bombarding us externally, the way in which we're really overworking ourselves, getting up at 4:30 in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning to work out, skipping breakfast, starving ourselves, only eating one meal a day. All of these things that these wellness warriors are doing is diminishing that flame even more. And it's causing significant burnout to where we're seeing massive fertility issues because kidneys are associated with reproduction. We're seeing early menopause. I just had a patient come in at 34.
Going through menopause.
And she has no period. And so the story there is back-to-back babies, so postpartum. And in Chinese medicine, we know that postpartum, we lose massive amounts of qi and blood, so energy and nutrients. So it's massive nutrient depletion. And so what we should be doing those 12 months after having a child is replenishing and repairing. In China, when they do this, they actually come back stronger. So after each childbirth, women come back stronger and more robust constitution. It's a time for them to rebuild and repair. For us, we're wanting that pre-baby bod back. We're working out so hard. We're, skipping meals, and we're doing that from an empty cup and nutrient depleted part. And so then you're so depleted, and now you have zero kidney chi. There's kidney chi, there's kidney yin, there's kidney yang, and there's kidney essence. Everything is completely depleted, and now you have no cycle. And you've just shot yourself not only into perimenopause in your 30s, but now you have no cycle. And the question is, are you going to stop what you're doing to get your period back? Or is this your future? So I see this, it's more obvious in women, but it's happening in men too through low testosterone and things like that.
Yeah, but you primarily work with women, right?
I do.
Okay, so you're seeing this, it's almost like commonplace now amongst women with these issues.
Yeah, I mean, I'm 46. I would say that the majority of my patients are in their 30s and 40s. Most of them are younger than me, and they are having significant perimenopausal symptoms. And I remember when I was in Chinese medicine school, the professor, she was from China, and we didn't talk about perimenopause because it really is kind of an insignificant thing. It wasn't as massive and long and drawn out and extensive with all of these side effects then as it is now in the modern world. And I think it's because everything that we're doing now, even if we're trying to be healthy because we're listening to all these gurus and influencers on social media, and it's just burning us out. And so it's just burning up that flame. And then these are the women who are going to be very frail and, exhausted.
What are some other like standard lifestyle things amongst the Chinese people? Let's say, I'm sure in many ways they're modernized and very similar to us now, which is unfortunate. But pre-Western influence, pre-modernization, stemming from traditional Chinese medicine roots that are commonplace that we could have some benefits from adopting.
It's all the things that I'm learning in the mitochondrial course. It's getting your circadian rhythm right, waking up at sunrise, getting that direct sunlight, having direct sun exposure, going to bed with the sun. It's eating what is native to your land and what is in season. We don't have that anymore. And that's what feeds us at certain times, because our bodies are just a microcosm of the environment around us. And when you live in harmony with it, then you are in health. And when you live in disharmony with it, which is what we're doing, then we're going to see rampant disease.
Yeah. I don't know if it's best to talk about functional medicine now or the 6 pathogenic factors. I know you mentioned one, like the emotions that come in. And to be clear, when she says pathogen, it's in a different context than what like most people these days consider pathogens to be. This is coming from maybe let's talk about that first, and then we can talk about functional medicine. Because I wanted to go into that next, because you just mentioned all of the very easy, free, just requires consistency things that we can do in our lives, implement now, that can lead to better health outcomes. Whereas so many people in the health and wellness world now overlook all of those things or lump those things in as biohacking quote techniques that also coincide with a variety of supplements and therapies, which like there are a number of devices that I have that I sometimes use, but I also check myself on, am I using these as a crutch or as a replacement for that which I can get naturally that is going to be far superior to this device? Or am I just using this as an additional thing to supplement, in the true context of the word supplement all of the free things that I can do on a day-to-day basis to maintain wellness? We'll set that aside for a second to talk about the 6 pathogenic factors.
Okay.
Though.
So in Chinese medicine, there's 6 pathogenic factors, and it's wind, like actual wind, cold, heat, dampness, dryness, and then what we already touched upon are the emotions. So all of these cause disease, and I'll just go through examples of each. So external wind, for instance.
When you say cause disease, would you mean they cause symptoms of illness?
They would cause symptoms of illness. In Chinese medicine, it would cause a disharmony in
that makes sense
pattern.
Because like when I think of disease, and I may be incorrect in this too. I mean, you're the credentialed doctor here. When I think of disease, my mind immediately goes to like a chronic condition that lasts a long time versus an acute illness set of symptoms.
Yeah, it's just a set of symptoms. It's a portrayal of there's disharmony.
That makes sense.
And something needs to be rectified.
Okay.
So with wind is considered the key that unlocks the door. And so wind oftentimes is associated with things like colds, viruses, our typical chills and fever, colds, flus, etc. And it's that wind has invaded and created, it's stimulated our immune system basically to fight it off. So it elicits fevers or chills and fever, etc.
We're talking about literal physical wind,
we are.
Right?
We are considering that as literal physical wind. So I'll give you an example. Bell's palsy patients, oftentimes, if we do a really comprehensive health history, usually within a day or two of them having the Bell's palsy, then they might have been under a lot of AC, or they may have been in a windy environment, or they may have gone from a very hot environment into a very cold blast of air environment. For me, one of the sickest I've ever been was I went in for a facial, and it was a hydrofacial, and they were using freezing cold water and ice on my face while they were blowing stuff, and I could feel myself getting sick as it was entering into my ear. And I had the worst cold for about a week. And so that would be considered exterior cold syndrome, elicited by wind, which unlocked that door for that cold, damp pathogen to enter.
Got it.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. And it's that from this frame, because from my understanding, and I could be completely incorrect, I think we said this off air, we may have already said it on air, that traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, did not consider microbe transfer in their initial conception. It was about what happens internally or externally in one's environment. So when we're talking about the 6 pathogenic factors, I know you said viruses in there and you also like smiled and laughed with that. So like maybe we could pull that apart a little bit. But with that, we're talking about like literal wind causing illness. So really sorry, you go ahead.
There's external wind, where there's the literal wind, and then there's what's considered internal wind, which is caused by liver dysfunction. And so that's where we get things like tremors, Parkinson's, things like that. Where we're having that inner wind disturbance that's causing even strokes sometimes.
Okay. And the reason I wanted to go there with that, and we can get into this later, because I want to talk about the phenomenon of vaccine shedding a little bit with you, because I've heard you mention what you were witnessing in people coming to your clinic after being exposed to people who had recently received some of the COVID shots. But other plausible explanations for the phenomenon of 2 or more people getting sick in the same space that don't have to do with microbes. And one of the things that I put forth in my presentations are weather changes relating to health issues. And this is kind of related to the 6 pathogenic factors.
And it is, and it can even go back to the seasons. Like in the fall, it's the season that's associated with the lungs. So oftentimes that season can exacerbate lung issues. In the spring, it's associated with the liver and the gallbladder. So it can exacerbate those issues.
That makes sense. Okay. So we have wind is one of them. And
so wind, we have cold. Cold is just what we think of as cold. That's why in Chinese medicine, we're not huge fans of ice baths or cold therapy, because what cold does is it stagnates blood and it creates a lot of stagnation. So we see this most overtly in our female patients with cycles, because if you think of somebody who has had a C-section, they're in a really cold operating room and they're being exposed. And so oftentimes that can create cold into the uterus. And so afterwards, there could be issues with fertility, because the uterus needs to be warm and healthy and create really healthy blood flow for pregnancy. It could just be from, like, for instance, me, I was a swimmer growing up, just being in a cold pool daily and being in a cold environment and having cold exposure to the lower areas of the pelvic floor. So that can cause a lot of issues. It's also associated, we can usually determine the type of pathogen, quote unquote pathogen it is, based on the type of pain somebody has. So if it's piercing and it's stabbing, then we know that that's likely associated with cold. We can also see it in reading the face or the tongue, where we can see purple tint to it, because if you think of what blood stasis is, it's going to create more coagulation and purpleness in the blood. And so we're going to see that reflected on the tongue. So cold is the second one. The third one is heat. That seems pretty obvious, like when we get overheated, but there can also be internal heat. So things like too much anger, that can raise our liver fire, and that's associated with things like hypertensions, headaches, things like that. Obviously, too much heat in the heart, fire can cause that shin disturbance and violent tempers. Let's see, we have dampness. Dampness is so common because dampness is just what you think it would be. It's like that soft, heavy, turbid substance. And so what creates dampness is, a way to look at it in more modern terms, is just poor metabolism. And what does that to us is our modern diets. And so we're constantly drinking cold drinks, and we're skipping breakfast, and we're not eating warm cooked meals that are nourishing to our digestion. And so that weakens our digestion over time. And so it doesn't have the function to churn the food and then transport the nutrients to our cells. And so it becomes stagnant, and then it builds phlegm or it builds fat on us. So that's dampness. Dampness can eventually fog the brain as well and create some brain fog, depression, just that kind of sluggish slowness aspect. And then there's dryness. Dryness is probably the easiest way to see this is in menopausal women. So when women are going through menopause, their estrogen and progesterone levels drop. And so they're losing that yin aspect. And yin is all about the nourishing fluids that keep us feminine and supple and, youthful, right? And so as we lose our yin, our yang doesn't necessarily change. So a good, healthy person is going to have yang energy, which is our vitality, our vibrance, our external expression, and then our yin, which is our nourishing substances. And so during menopause, all of that, lessens. And so then we'll end up with dry heat. So all of these women who are having hot flashes, they have dryness in every orifice. They're having their skin look more withered. So that's an example of what we would call deficient yin, which is dryness. So again, we're just a microcosm of our external environment in all of these ways.
So a lot of these internal ones, I would assume, are stemming from both the emotional and the literal physical things that are causing illness. And so that's when you talk about like internal heat, internal dampness. That's what we're referring to, right?
Yeah, because, even the emotions can create dysfunction of their own chi. So for instance, think about somebody who was told something and it was a shock to them and now they can no longer swallow their food.
Yeah.
The natural chi of the digestion is to go down and out. And so if we can't literally swallow our food, then there's a dysfunction with that chi. And so it's going to be up and they can't swallow.
Got it.
I had a really cool experience with a patient who had come to me several years ago who had chronic hiccups. She had been in and out of hospitals. They had done IV treatments. They had put her on tons of muscle relaxants. And it was at the point where she couldn't sleep. She couldn't complete a sentence because she was hiccuping every 6 seconds or so. No. It was miserable. And
for days on end where it wouldn't stop?
It would not stop.
Wow.
And so when she came in to see me, it was just like this hiccup. And so when I learned about her situation, I think her house had gotten flooded or something. And it was just like a shock to her system. So anytime there's a shock to the system, it scatters the chi and it's trying to find its way back. And sometimes it gets stuck. And so what I did with her was I did a back shoe treatment where I was tapping into all of her organ systems. And within, I would say about 2 minutes, her hiccups stopped.
Wow.
By the time we finished the treatment, it was probably 35 minutes or so. They were gone and they never came back. It was just that dysfunction of the flow that we had to recalibrate.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really cool.
And okay, so going back to the external 6 pathogens, I think you still have one more to hit.
The last one was the emotions.
Okay, so the last one was the emotions. Okay, so when it comes to the external factors, again, each of these, in my mind, and please correct me if I'm wrong, sort of does relate to weather patterns and weather changes. Yeah. So do we oftentimes see from a traditional Chinese medicine perspective that after drastic weather changes, or let's say a family travels, they live in, I don't know, let's use an extreme example here. They live in upper Minnesota and it's December and it's cold, and they abruptly travel to Mexico where it's incredibly hot for some time and then travel back. Would that possibly present an example of one of those 6 pathogenic factors amongst a collective family?
Potentially, it depends on each of their constitutions and what they go into it with.
Okay, so when you say constitutions that they go into it with, what do you mean by that?
So we all have a certain constitution where our body is weaker or stronger, right?
Okay, that's what you mean.
So yeah, how strong is somebody? How robust is their system? because the stronger you are, the more robust you are, you're going to be less affected by these changes.
The less the internal variations of those different pathogenic factors are prevalent in that individual's life, because they are mindful of their circadian rhythm, blah, blah, like processing their emotions and all these things. Yeah, that just makes sense. Okay. I wasn't sure if you meant constitution, and like, I know a lot of Ayurvedic traditions, there's specific, like you are this type of constitution, this type of constitution.
I mean, we still have that in Chinese medicine where you're more of a fire or earth or metal. And so you tend to have, health conditions related to that. But for the most part, it's more about like the robustness of your actual constitution, your chi. How strong are you and how resilient are you?
Got it. Cool.
And so it's not necessarily always environmental, meaning like the weather. It could just be like sitting in an air-conditioned room. One of the things that we're always talking about as acupuncturists is having our necks covered at all times, because that point at the back of our neck is oftentimes where the wind pathogen will enter and cause our head colds. Or our flus. And so we get that stiffness of neck, we get the, sneezing, watery eyes, all of those cold symptoms.
Deep sleep, or NREM sleep, is crucial for our body's daily rejuvenation, repair, and overall well-being. And unfortunately, most people fail to get enough of this essential phase of sleep. It's responsible for some pretty crucial functions, including daily rejuvenation and repair, regulating cravings, weight loss, hormone balance, boosting energy, and more. If you're not getting enough deep sleep, you may struggle with some of the issues that I listed. There are several factors at play, including things like non-native EMF exposure, artificial light exposure, and circadian dysregulation. But another big reason for a lack of deep sleep is magnesium deficiency. Over 80% of the population is deficient in magnesium, and magnesium plays a crucial role in our sleep, one of which is increasing gamma-aminobutyric acid, or GABA, which encourages relaxation on a cellular level. Magnesium also plays a key role in regulating your body's stress response, and when you're deficient, you tend to have higher stress levels, which, as you can imagine, doesn't exactly help with sleep. Now, before you go out and buy a magnesium supplement, it's important to understand that most products out there only have 1 to 2 forms of magnesium, when the reality is your body needs all 7 forms of this essential sleep mineral. That's why I recommend Magnesium Breakthrough. Magnesium Breakthrough from Bioptimizers contains all 7 forms of magnesium, designed to help calm your mind, help you fall asleep, stay asleep, and wake up feeling refreshed. The deep sleep benefits when you get all 7 forms of magnesium through Magnesium Breakthrough are really noticeable, and as I've shared before, I don't take a lot of supplements, nor do I promote a lot of supplements, but this is one supplement that my family is regularly using. And there's a reason that this is a best-selling product for Bioptimizers. For an exclusive offer, go to bioptimizers.com/Alec, or just head to the show notes and use promo code ALEC10 during checkout to save 10%. And if you subscribe, not only will you get amazing discounts and free gifts, you will also make sure your monthly supply is guaranteed. The other thing I want to talk about with Chinese medicine a little bit is herbs. So I know that's a huge component of it too. So wherever you want to start with that.
So I feel like I'm more of an herbalist actually than an acupuncturist. I feel like herbs are just so beautifully created, and there's a harmony by which all of these formulas are made, because they have the function, and then they have like directors on guide, and we call them guiding herbs. And so if you have, like, for instance, shoulder pain, then we have herbs specifically that will guide the herbs that will help heal the area to the shoulder itself, or to the fingers, or it'll go up to the head, or it'll go into the uterus. And so we have it with such specificity. In Chinese medicine, there's probably over 600 single herbs that we learned and over 400 formulas that we learned. And I would say for female, like, hormonal issues, any sort of gynecological issues, herbs is going to be the way to go as far as healing. And acupuncture is supplemental to that. And
is that the approach for most traditional Chinese medicine practitioners? Is that just like your unique approach?
I would say probably yes. However, not all not all licensed acupuncturists are also herbalists. In Texas and in California, we have to do both. But in some states, you can do either or both.
Okay.
So it's not all encompassing, but herbs for me in my practice are what I tend to value a little bit more. Yeah.
Got it.
And I think it's because it's something that they can do daily and it's correcting it over a period of time. And then the beauty with herbs too is that your herbal formula is never stagnant because we as humans and our health is always dynamic. So it's not like you're always going to take the supplement until a year down the road. With herbs, we really do have to check in. And for instance, anytime they have cold-like symptoms, then I have to go through a whole background and figure out, is this exterior wind, cold, heat, what exactly is this? Because there could be 25 different herbal formulas that I could use that's going to be most appropriate for their symptoms.
Got it.
So it has just such specificity and efficacy that once we get that herbal formula correct, then it corrects the disharmony and the symptoms, and then it can go back to health.
Got it. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
This is a perfect segue into some of the functional medicine stuff too.
Mm-hmm.
What led you to want to become a functional medicine practitioner in the first place?
Yeah. So I graduated in 2013 in Chinese medicine. By 2019, that was when I had that full body rash, and I was so bloated and I was really fatigued, and I was like, what the heck is going on? And so I started ordering my own labs, like functional labs, and that's when I learned I had a lot of environmental toxins. I had that severe sensitivity to gluten. I had the genetic component to celiac disease. And so everything just kind of started making sense. And when I removed gluten from my diet, everything just fell back into place, and I felt so much better. And I did some other things too. So again, I used myself as the prototype, and then I just went from there. And I think too, I think a lot of us as Chinese medicine practitioners, we're feeling a little bit held underwater in the sense of the noise that functional medicine is making. And I was probably one of the first doctors of Chinese medicine to step into functional medicine because I was using it for myself. And then I just got caught up in the protocols and the learning, the supplements and all of that. And what I learned over time, because I've been doing it since 2019, is the more supplements that my patients have been on, the less it's effective.
I'm so happy you said that.
It's ridiculous.
It's also important to define what a supplement is, because it is really like a catch-all term at this point, which is why I said this is a perfect segue, because there are a lot of herbal supplements that are literally just herbs. And like it's termed supplements because sometimes they're coming in a capsule, and people like anything that's in a capsule is a supplement at this point, whether it's organ meats that are dehydrated or it's herbs or it's something that was synthesized in a lab. That all fits under the category of supplements. These days. Yeah. And so I think it's important to clarify like what we actually mean with supplements. What you're referring to, I'd imagine,
is
in
not
that category
herbs.
Is not herbs. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I was having patients come in, I am not joking, who they will bring suitcases of supplements that they're taking. I've had patients bring in Excel sheets that are 3 pages long of supplements that they're taking, and they're miserable and they've hit a wall. And so my approach now is take them off of everything, see what we're left with, and then we build from the foundation from there. And it also, what people don't realize is every single thing that we come in contact with and what we put into our body, whether it's food or supplements, is information. And if you are just blindly swallowing pills because this influencer is selling it, then you're creating disharmony somewhere else by taking an excess of something. There's always a direct correlation. So for instance, the more vitamin D we're taking, the less calcium in our bones. So it's actually creating issues with our bone health and creating a higher risk of osteoporosis. So even these things that we think is completely innocuous that people have been taking really high doses of for a really long period of time are creating imbalance and disharmony, and they're taking away minerals or something else. Or they're just congesting the liver, and we see that too. Or they're taking such massive amounts of supplements, or they're doing these juice detoxes or something. And you know those things that just have like a ton of supplements, like, or product list on the product itself, like tons of vitamins and minerals and everything at these outrageous percentages. That's shooting a lot of my patients into overmethylation. And so overmethylation is the addition of these methyl groups. And just like everybody's so aware now of undermethylation, which is associated with MTHFR. And since everybody has MTHFR, everybody's doing these methylated folates and B vitamins. And so they do this, and it's pushing them into overmethylation, and that can cause immune system dysregulation and autoimmune disease.
Interesting.
So I had a patient, for instance, who had been working with me just only doing acupuncture, and she was using an MD down the road, a medical doctor down the road who does functional medicine. And this medical doctor is notorious for prescribing hundreds of supplements to her patients. And in January, the doctor was talking about this cleanse that everybody needs to go on. So my patient told me that she was going to do it. And I said, well, based on your history of Hashimoto's, I think that's a really bad idea. Number one, we never do a detox or cleanse in January. Like, it's a time of restoration and like repair, right? We just don't do that then. It's cold. Like, why are you doing that? So she was like, well, I'm going to do it. And I said, if you're going to do it, I want to monitor your thyroid antibodies. And so we looked at her thyroid antibodies before, and we looked at them a month later afterwards, and she had shot up hundreds of points with her antibodies. And she was so shocked. And I said, why are you shocked? I told you this was going to happen. She was like, well, I just didn't think like doing a detox cleanse would do this. And I was like, well, yeah, you're overmethylating. You're giving yourself so much information that your body can't handle. And now your immune system is even more out of whack.
You know what? Like, when it comes to protocols in general, even outside of the realm of functional medicine, I'm becoming more and more skeptical of them. Someone, I forget who posted something on social media, and it was someone that I already tremendously respect. And they said, when you take a human being and treat them as if no matter how they're presenting, they need to do this protocol, that's akin to saying this soil in sub-Saharan Africa needs the exact same inputs as the soil in Louisiana and the exact same treatment in order to produce nutrient-dense food. And like, when that analogy was presented to me, I'm like, oh my God, that is so true. Like, no matter the protocol, it's going to be unique to the individual.
Absolutely.
You can't make a protocol one size fits all for all people. It doesn't work like that when it comes to health.
Yeah. And it's becoming overt, and it's what patients are asking for. Because again, we're being inundated through social media. And I think there's a lot of people online who are talking about health, and they're selling their parasite cleanses, or they're selling whatever they're selling, and they're practicing medicine without a license. That's what I think. And again, I feel like my voice is being drowned out, and the voices of many of my colleagues, because we're not out to sell. And so I get a lot of pushback from patients.
Yeah. Well, it's also because traditional Chinese medicine, relative to a lot of like the functional medicine and really just like the wellness industry at this point, is rooted in overwhelmingly, here are the very simple free things that you can do that are beneficial for you. Yeah.
And again, I get a lot of pushback on that. Well, I'm not doing that. So what can you give me? And I've gotten to the point where I'm like, there is no supplement, protocol, cleanse, detox that I can give you that is going to undo what your lifestyle is doing for you right now. That's gotten you into the position that you're in now.
Yeah.
So it takes personal responsibility, and they're willing to do a lot of things, but they want it done within their frame of reference that they're willing to do. So they're not going to take time to restore and repair and cultivate their health. They want to keep working out super hard and keep fasting and doing all these things that are impairing, their organ function and their health.
What's your general opinion on fasting?
So At first I was like, yeah, this is great. I think for long-term fasting is good. And obviously if, heaven forbid, I was ever diagnosed with cancer, or I had that, or I had a really severe disease, I would definitely do long-term fasting.
Okay, you're talking about an extended fast.
Extended fast.
Yeah. Okay.
Where you go into ketosis, you drop all your sugar and carbs, and then you go on a water fast.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Intermittent fasting, which is what so many people are doing now, especially women, especially cycling women, it is absolutely destroying their health. And it did for me. My TSH was my thyroid function. It completely collapsed, and I've had to rebuild everything. Because it feels good and you're losing weight because you're running on stress hormones. But again, it's that kidney fire, it's that adrenal fire, that's your vitality that you're burning out.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're aging more quickly, you're hitting menopause more quickly, you're having issues with low testosterone in men, erectile dysfunction, all sorts of stuff that we're seeing as severe kidney qi deficiency. And yeah, it's aging us considerably. And you can see it on the faces of women. And I say women, mostly because they become hollow. They start to get really deep lines in their forehead. And so
more
we can
sunken
see
in.
that more hollow and sunken in. And then all of a sudden, when you shut down your adrenal function and that kidney fire, then you're shutting down your thyroid, which is your metabolism, which is what happened to me. And it's what's happening to a lot of my patients. But to explain the significance of you have to eat in the morning, and they're like, well, I'm not hungry. I'm like, well, the reason you're not hungry is because you're still running on stress hormones. But once you start to get back to that circadian rhythm and eat when you're supposed to, then everything starts to turn back on and click.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I am not at all a fan of intermittent fasting.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I've never really done intermittent fasting, at least not more than like a couple weeks at a time, and I don't do it anymore. I have done one meal a day for some time, and I felt that I didn't feel any negative effects related to that, but I'm in a phase right now where I'm trying to lose fat, gain muscle. So I'm eating a lot of protein. I'm eating 2, 3, sometimes 4 times a day. And that's just me for myself. But I have done extended water fast where I did one for 15 days. And I published an episode related to it. And it's not that I was being careless. It's just that I didn't consider the fact that men and women are biologically completely different. Like we're completely different. And so when I published that episode, because I did experience tremendous benefits doing a 15-day water fast, and I wasn't incredibly sick going into it, but I felt incredible afterwards. Most importantly, I felt that I was free of the noise around me, and I had to face a lot of stuff internally that I hadn't faced before related to various traumatic things that had happened in my life, right? And I felt so spiritually connected afterwards. But when I published that episode, I had a lot of women that were pissed about that. And like 80% of my listeners and viewers are women. And so I caught a lot of flack for putting out that episode, which I totally understand at this point. And there's a book, I forget who it's by, but it's called Fast Like a Woman.
Mindy Pelz.
Yeah. For those women who are interested in pursuing fasting and how to do it appropriately as a woman, because we are different. And you look at like any of the prominent religious and spiritual figures who fasted over the course of history, always referred to men doing fasting. And I don't know exactly what that is. I haven't sat with that for a while or for long enough on why I think it can be very spiritually beneficial for men. I'll even speak for me coming from Western civilization, where overwhelmingly we don't have rites of passage for men like various cultures across the world have had for a long time. We don't have that as men in Western civilization. So I sort of viewed this and felt as if, especially in hindsight, that it felt like a rite of passage for me to go do this, to go out spiritually by myself, primarily in nature, and just be with me and water. And that's it, right? Felt that it was incredibly healing. But all that being said, totally acknowledge where for women, it's a totally different story. And I have friends, I was speaking to you off air, that have done fasting that are very well-known health people that just wanted to explore it. This is a female that I'm speaking about who had horrible health effects after doing a fast. That being said, I think you also said that if you had cancer or something like this, fasting would be a legitimate thing to possibly consider doing to help reverse that, very detrimental or like severe chronic issue.
Right. Yeah. Any major disease that I may be diagnosed with, that's the way I would go for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. But as far as like the intermittent fasting, what I've learned is, so based on our natural circadian rhythm, our adrenals pump out cortisol to like as we wake up. And so as we're waking up, our cortisol rises and then it spikes around 10 to 10:30 in the morning, and then it naturally declines. And so what happens with intermittent fasting is our cortisol continues to rise and it elevates even more. And so we end up running on these stress hormones over time. And where cortisol goes, blood sugar goes, because I didn't understand that when my patients were following the intermittent fasting that was laid out to them by the books that they had been reading, that their blood glucose for the most part was getting worse, especially their fasting glucose. And they would just push harder and try to do more fasting to bring their glucose down. But over time, it kept rising. And then I would see it eventually in their hemoglobin A1C, which is looking at the last 3 months of blood sugars. And that was starting to rise. And I was like, this is supposed to help regulate our blood sugar. But when you start to understand the physiology between your stress hormones and where your stress hormones go, blood sugar follows, then it makes sense. So it's creating just a bunch of running on stress hormones, dysregulation in stress hormones, dysregulation in blood sugar. And then after people eventually hit a wall, it usually takes 18 months to 2 years, then we're left with a lot of metabolic dysfunction.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I've also noticed that there's something about women who are of like in their childbearing years.
Yes.
If they fast, that can be horrible for them because it does mess with their hormones too.
Oh, for sure. And, that's what happened recently with a new patient of mine who was 34 and she had just come off of having two back-to-back babies. And so she was postpartum, and in Chinese medicine, we're depleted of qi and blood, right? And then you go into these fasting states and you're running on the stress hormones, and that's all kidney related. So kidney is associated with our fertility and our function and our hormones. So our reproductive health is our kidney function. So if you drain out your adrenals, then you're going to drain out your reproductive health.
Yeah.
And so you're going to hit, like I said before, the perimenopause and menopause much sooner.
It makes a lot of sense too, because I feel like it's our bodies, despite going through something challenging, doing something brilliant, where the extra accumulation of life force energy that we have goes into the possibility of the creation of another life. And now it's having to pull that back in and reserve it for us so we become less fertile.
That's right.
Yeah, that's the way that I view it. That makes a lot of sense. If you could just share like some of the best testimonies that you have, or the coolest examples that you've seen of traditional Chinese medicine in practice, where patients are coming in with some crazy issue that they're dealing with and then experience traditional Chinese medicine and are able to heal.
Yeah, I think, so I had a cluster of younger female patients come in all around the same time, maybe 9 months ago or so. And they were all dealing with the same issues. It was endometriosis, it was severe PMS, it was painful periods. And it was also interstitial cystitis, which is like a chronic irritation of the urinary bladder, or frequent UTIs. And so I spoke to them, and we actually took a Chinese medicine approach versus a functional medicine approach. So we changed diet, lifestyle, went on an anti-inflammatory diet. Obviously, gluten was taken out of the diet. And we just use acupuncture and herbs. And for every single one of these patients, they no longer have painful periods. They no longer have PMS. Now, one of them, she just came in this week and she was like, I have a libido. She's in her late 20s. She's like, I've never had a libido before.
That's wild, especially in late 20s.
And I'm like,
are people experiencing that?
Girl.
Right.
And well, she had also been on birth control for a long time. And so we used acupuncture to help mitigate the side effects of getting off of the birth control. And so now she's like getting her ovulation cycles back. And so she's actually feeling what it feels like to go through the cycling each month. And she was just like, is that okay? Is it okay to have a libido? I'm like, yes, it's a sign of health and vitality. And we're working on the interstitial cystitis, which is incredibly debilitating for women. And again, I say women because it is mostly associated with women. And usually there is a direct correlation between interstitial cystitis and endometriosis. It's an inflammatory condition. And so just with the acupuncture and the Chinese herbs, they're all going through recovery. And it's been really amazing. I think some of my coolest, I would say miracle treatments are more associated with NAET, with the clearings. Which if you want to, we can get into what NAET is.
Yeah, let's go there.
So NAET stands for Nambudripad's allergy elimination technique. And Dr. Devi Nambudripad is a medical doctor, a chiropractor, a doctor of acupuncture and Chinese medicine. And I think she was also a homeopath.
Damn.
I know. It's like, it's like everything.
Yeah.
And so.
That's an insane amount of schooling. Like, my goodness.
Yes. And
does she have kids?
She does. Yeah, because
what the hell? I have no excuse. When my first question, anytime I see someone like that, I'm like, there's no way they have kids.
Yeah.
And then when they do, I'm like, damn, what's my excuse?
She at one point, and she talks about this in her book, it's called Say Goodbye to Illness. She talks about this where she was only able to eat 2 foods, rice and I think broccoli. Everything else she had severe sensitivity to, and she couldn't digest it. And so she was using all of the things that she had learned in all of her modalities, but nothing was really working or getting her healthy or healing her. And so she created her own technique, which she refers to as the allergy elimination technique, where you combine all of this. And I don't know, must have been source coming through her or something to create this. But basically, we use a homeopathic vial of whatever the allergen is. And an allergen is defined as something that your body has a disharmony with. It's not necessarily an IgE-mediated reaction that we're going to see on a blood test. It could be a person, a thing, an event, an emotion, chemical, fabric, anything we can have a disharmony with that our body reacts to.
I appreciate that approach more than looking at a lab-related panel to determine what you are allergic to, because I feel like, I'm not going to say there's not benefits to that, but I think if you outsource to that exclusively, especially to certain types of panels that people take, that is just a snapshot in time to that moment. Yes,
that's exactly all it is. I never do food sensitivity testing because it's just that. And if we were to do it later on down the road, it's going to look different.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that. We use a vial of whatever the quote unquote allergen is. So I have literally over 1,000 vials in my clinic. And we treat with the patient holding the vial. I muscle test to see if there's weakness or strength. If there's weakness, there's a disharmony. And it's based on physical, chemical, or emotional disharmony. So we can even have like an emotional reaction or an emotion associated with whatever it is. And so then I do massage. We do massage along the spine. And as we do the massage, there's a breathing technique. And what this does is it kind of resets your nervous system and your immune system to whatever it is that you're holding to create a new relationship with that thing. And then after we do the breathing, I check to see if there's a weakness or strength. Most of the time it's strong. And then that means that they cleared that reaction. And then I do the acupuncture to set the treatment and create the circuit to get it to all the organ systems. Yeah. And then they refrain from being in contact with that substance. So if it's like we're treating them for eggs or something, they don't eat eggs or come in contact with eggs or chicken for a day, 25 hours. And what that does is our own circadian clock, according to Chinese medicine, it allows it to go through every single organ system so that it's making a clearing through any organ system. During that time, I coach my patients to write whether or not they have any flare-up. If they do, what time was their flare-up so that we can start to see any correlation. And sometimes there's a physical response. Sometimes there's a flaring up of the symptoms, just like in homeopathy.
Yep.
like it's an expression of the symptom as it's clearing. There could be an emotional outburst. And then, so we can do that for physical things, emotions, etc. Recently, I've been working with families of the victims of the flood.
Oh, man.
And I've had to do a lot of trauma treatments, and that's been really, really hard. So there's been heartbreak, grief, guilt, resentment, rage, trauma, these things that the patients that I'm working with have been holding on to. One of the coolest, I would say, experiences that I had was a woman who was in her late 30s who had had asthma her entire life, and she was dependent on an inhaler. And we did the NAET approach, and there is a foundational treatment where it's the first 17 treatments, and it kind of includes all the vitamins, minerals, foods that we come in contact with. Because the reason that Dr. Nambudripad set it forth that way is so that our body can better assimilate our nutrients, and it just makes your constitution that much more strong moving forward. And so we went through the basic 15 with this patient, and her asthma had gotten better. But then as she would tell me stories, because a lot of times the healing is in the stories, and I can get a lot of insight just from what the patient has been through in childhood or something like that. Or sometimes I can just muscle test, is this an event that happened? And what had happened in her early childhood, she was very young, she had been bitten by a dog. And ever since then, she's had asthma. And so what I did was I took lungs, dog, and fear, and I treated her for those 3 things, and her asthma went away completely.
Incredible.
And it never came back.
Incredible.
And it's like, that is when we see the miracles happen. It's just like something that's so overt. And something similar happened during 2020, 2021, when people were being hospitalized. And one of my patients who came to see me, she was a new patient, and she was going through significant trauma because she watched her father pass away on a ventilator. And I did a treatment for her nervous system. I did a treatment for trauma. And then what really kind of got her to the next step in healing was, it was cotton, plastics. It was basically everything that she was surrounded by in the hospital room. And I did a cluster of those things. And that's what kind of stopped her panic attacks. And at one point she was unable to go to work because of the sadness and grief that she had.
That's really interesting, because it's like those things weren't literally dis-ease causing, but they were associated with the experience she had that was the incident that shocked her system to be disease causing.
That's exactly right. And so in the training that I went through with NAET, Dr. Devi tells a story about during 9/11. So she was practicing in LA. So what is that, 3-hour difference from that, And what was happening with her patients during 9/11 was they were getting up, about to go to work, and they were eating breakfast. And all of a sudden, a month after 9/11, all of her patients were coming in and having severe allergic reactions or sensitivities to common breakfast foods.
Wow.
Coffee, orange juice, eggs, oatmeal, things like that. And it was the trauma and the tragedy of the event that imprinted on them. And our body can't distinguish, is it this that we're watching on TV, or is it what we're ingesting? And so it creates a disharmony with whatever it is that we are in contact with at that time. Same thing with a patient who was allergic to her favorite leather jacket. She was like, I had to give this leather jacket away because every time I wore it, I would get this horrific rash. And it was the same jacket she was wearing when she found out her dad had passed away.
Oh, man.
So it's really just the impact that we carry in those situations. Getting into a car accident when you're drinking coffee, and then all of a sudden you're allergic to coffee.
It's wild. It's so wild. I wonder how much with this NAET method belief plays into it. And I would imagine quite a bit. Like for someone who has a strong belief.
I can't do it.
Yeah.
I cannot do it.
Yeah. That despite going through like the series of things that are helping to uplift this from their system and get it out so that they no longer have that association with that thing. If they have a strong psychological impact related to that thing, that they believe fundamentally that that thing is harming them.
So the first thing that we have to do as NAET practitioners when we work with every patient every single time is we have to ask permission. And if you don't get permission, you cannot do the treatment. And so sometimes they just don't believe it. And so it's not going to stick. And sometimes I'll get permission, but then as I do the breathing over and over, it just doesn't stick. And I'm like, we're not doing this today. Your body is not wanting it. And I think it's all coming from a belief system.
Totally. Makes so much sense. I mean, when you study the placebo-nocebo effect, I mean, my goodness, like the countless examples of people, both on the negative and positive side of, for example, cancer, when receiving a placebo, a saline placebo or a sugar pill, and they think it's an experimental cancer treatment, and their hair literally falls out related to that strong belief. There's one example of, and I might butcher some of the details of this, of someone who had stage 4 cancer, receiving what they thought was this new and improved experimental cancer drug that was like incredibly effective. They took it, their cancer actually subsided when in reality it was literally just a placebo. And then once they found out that what they had taken, it came back and they died. That's wild.
Well, I mean, there's evidence of SSRIs compared to placebo and placebo outperforming for depression.
Did you know that when you're a pharmaceutical sales rep?
No, I don't think so. Of course not. But yeah, isn't that crazy?
It is wild.
But it's all about the manipulation, going back to the statistics and stuff. So yeah, it's amazing. But then we also can treat, I've treated young children with NAET, and there's efficacy there. So I see it mostly in people who just have a hard line no, where you're just not willing, you can't break that barrier. And so they're just not willing to receive the treatment. Yeah,
that makes sense. Okay. Since you brought up 2020 a little bit and treating people around then, I think this is a good segue into what I wanted to talk about now, because I have a lot of thoughts, but I've never dealt with someone in person who is presenting, from your standpoint as a practitioner, someone presenting with symptoms related to this phenomenon. And what I'm referring to is the phenomenon of vaccine shedding. I want to be clear here. I do not deny the phenomenon. I'm not denying the phenomenon. What I question is the alleged cause of said phenomenon. Now, I've heard you on another podcast, and granted, this was a podcast you recorded a while back with Courtney Turner. Shout out to Courtney, dear friend of mine, where you were talking about some symptoms of radiation poisoning pertaining to people who had not received the product themselves, but been around people who had. Can you expand upon that a little bit more?
So I will say it all kind of started with me. I got really sick from whatever COVID was in 2021. And it was the summer of 2021. And I lost my taste and smell, but it wasn't like a cold. Like when you're all congested and runny nose and stuff, it wasn't that. It was like I could feel the part of my brain that was not functioning. And it was so incredibly frustrating. And then the tastes were manipulated. And then what I noticed was 3 months later, I had massive hair loss. I mean, my hair, it was really long. It was, almost down to my hips, and I had to chop it all off. I ended up getting extensions because you could just see my scalp. It was really bad. And then it wasn't just me. A lot of my female patients were like, my hair's falling out. I'm gaining a ton of weight. My hormones are off. And it was all the things that I had been experiencing. Some of them were still trying to regain their taste and smell. And then I had this patient come in who had recently lost her grandmother, like within a couple days. And her grandmother had been vaccine injured from one of the COVID vaccines. Originally, what happened to her was she lost her eyesight, so she went blind. And then shortly after that, something happened and she was in hospice care.
This is the grandmother.
This is the grandmother.
That went blind.
The grandmother went blind.
Not the individual that was around the grandmother.
Not the patient.
Got it.
So the patient came to me and was telling me the story about what happened to her grandmother. And she was like, and the weirdest thing happened. She was like, as she was dying, she was sweating profusely, and she hugged her grandmother goodbye, and everywhere that the sweat touched, she had a rash. And so she had been to the dermatologist, and the dermatologist was like, it just looks like dermatitis. And I looked at it and I go, that looks like a radiation burn to me. And she was like, well, how would that be? And I was like, well, maybe it's not a virus we're dealing with, and this shedding isn't a virus. Maybe this is radiation. And so what I did was I kind of did my own double-blind placebo, maybe not double-blind, but so what I did was I had my radiation vial for NAET, and then I had maybe 10 or 12 other vials, and I just jumbled them up, put them in my pocket, and I just started testing her. And I didn't know what I was using. I didn't know what vial, and she didn't know what vial. And I think I combined it with skin because I wanted it to be specific to what she was dealing with. And there was radiation was what came up weakest.
Wow.
Over and over. And I kept checking it. And she was like, what is that? I was like, it's radiation. And it all made sense because it was like the brain. I can't even explain it. It was like your brain was not functioning. And then the hair loss. And then just all of it started making sense. And the fact that the radiation, the rash looked like radiation. So I did the treatment for her, did the radiation clearing, and then within a day it was gone.
Wow. Okay. So that is in perfect alignment with what I've come to the conclusion on vaccine shedding, that phenomenon being. And I don't know that there are plenty of explanations for what actually is happening. And of course, I'm not going to say with 100% certainty that there is not some sort of physical particle or particles being passed when it comes to vaccine shedding. Now, I want to be very clear though, because people that listen to this podcast might be like, Alec, are you saying that it's a germ? I'm like, no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying I'm not leaving out the possibility for that being created with some sort of synthetic form of something.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that that's it though. And even if you look at the available data on vaccine shedding under the premise that there is a particle being passed, there's not any sufficient evidence demonstrating that that is the reality. Now, that's not to deny the phenomenon.
Right.
Again, I think a lot of people get hung up on the conflate cause or alleged cause with effect. Like when someone says, for example, let's take 9/11. 9/11 was an inside job or 9/11 was a false flag. Are you saying that it was all a hoax and no one died? No, that's not what we're saying. Likewise, when we say there's not sufficient evidence that a virus exists or causes illness, people be like, are you saying I didn't get sick? That's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying at all. We're just saying that the cause that is being put forth has not been sufficiently demonstrated to exist. So we need to start looking at other possible explanations for what causes this phenomenon, right? So I've thought about how, we have what's the electromagnetic field that surrounds the human body that is known as the human biofield, right? And I think women, given that there's a very commonplace phenomenon of women syncing up on their menstrual cycles, there's something to do with women being more in tune to their biofield, more sensitive to things metaphysically. And that's why women tend to have better intuition than men do. I think their biofields are much more sensitive biologically. And it makes sense given that women are the caregivers for and the primary nourishment for babies, making sure that the home is secure and safe, the man's the protector, the provider, et cetera, right?
Mm-hmm.
So biologically, it just makes sense. And I think that this phenomenon that we experienced really with the rollout of the vaccines of people being around those who had been recently vaccinated was most predominant in women. Would you agree with that?
I would, yeah.
Yeah. Based on what I saw, it was most prevalent in women.
I think we also saw the side effects of it in female issues, like the fertility, like the miscarriages, like the really bad periods, things like that.
Totally. Like all went back to women's reproductive organs. And so what I think is that we can speculate all day on what is actually in the vials. And until mass spec is done, we can't we have no clue what's actually in them. Yes, there's what's published. Yes, there's people who've done dark field microscopy, but even then, unless you're adequately trained in dark field microscopy, a lot of the things that people are alleging to be self-assembling nanobots are actually just misidentified salt crystals in many ways. And I did a deep dive with Adam Bigelson and Dr. Anna Maria Oliva. They're well-trained in dark field microscopy, and they're showing that a lot of these very fear-inducing things that people are claiming to see in the vials are not what they think they are. They're just not trained in dark field microscopy. And that's not to say there isn't some sketchy stuff in the vials.
Yeah, something nefarious.
Right.
Right.
Irrespective of what's in them, what I think could be happening is that this is a novel poison that a lot of people are receiving, right? In women, because their biofields are more sensitive, and especially because women are known to seek up other menstrual cycles with other women, that would imply to me that there's some sort of energetic communication between women that is stronger. They're more tethered than, between a man, like between men, let's say. So when women are around other women who've received these poisons, the women who received it, their fields are emitting a signal of distress, emitting a signal of, I have just experienced poisoning that I have not experienced before. And because I am around you, I am energetically communicating that signal to you, and your body is now receiving it as, oh my gosh, there's this new poison in the environment. I need to shed what is one of the primary ways women detoxify through menstruation, right? So you would see women have I forget what they're called, where it's like a cast of their uterus, literally shed out of them. I think it's called decidual cast. Yeah, something like that. Or just insane menstrual irregularities, or women who had already gone through menopause, now all of a sudden
they're having it again.
Periods again. And I think what it was is, it's not that there was something physically passed. I think it's that whatever is in the shots is expressing through that individual's biofield, and then people who did not receive the shots, especially women, are receiving that information through their field. They're receiving it as alarm bells, because biologically there's energetic communication between all of us. And it's like, oh, okay, it's now time for me to shed and to have to have a very quick detoxification, very harsh detoxification. And also, I think it could be a function of radiation with whatever's going on, emitting through that individual's biofield, where women who are, again, much more sensitive are then picking up on that and are like, okay, this is an alarm for me. Yeah. This is my body telling me that I need to detoxify, or I need to stay away from whatever that poison is.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say, but
I know that's out there too.
No, I totally understand where you're coming from. It makes a lot of sense. And it's like, I do believe in that energetic, but I also believe I think there was something physically nefarious that was being emitted. Just like when I would walk into, eventually what my associate and I did, because she specializes in fertility. So she primarily just works with fertility, pregnancy, postpartum. And so all of our patients at that time, who had gotten the vaccine, my associate and I, we never did. And just by walking into the room, it was just like this wave of impact that we could feel. And then our health was being impacted directly. So it's like, yes, could it be an energetic thing? Yeah, I do believe that's a component, but I still think that there's something we may not even know exists. But it was something. And what we ended up doing is we just had to have people who had been vaccinated not come into the clinic for about 4 to 6 weeks after, because it was impacting our health. And we didn't know if it was in the sheets or seeping into the bedding somehow. You know what I mean? Even though we're changing the sheets often, it's we didn't know. So just for safety reasons, we were preventing people from coming in who had been vaccinated. I mean, we lost a ton of patients because of it, but we gained the patients that were most aligned with us too.
That makes sense. And I want to be clear for people listening, I'll just share from my perspective. I don't think people who receive the vaccine are destined to have a decreased lifespan or are destined to die or are destined to have health complications. Now, there is higher prevalence in people who receive the vaccines, but my point is I think the body is incredible at self-regenerating, self-healing, and detoxifying. Is it that it might be a little bit more challenging to truly detoxify and grapple with the decision you've made spiritually, which has a real impact on your physical health? Yes, absolutely. But I don't think you're like determined or destined to die or anything like this.
Yeah.
I know some other people carry that narrative around. But really interesting on a loss of taste and smell piece, just covering that real quick. There is a lot of correlation with hair loss, skin issues, loss of taste and smells with exposure, prolonged exposure or repetitive exposure to non-native EMFs.
Yeah.
And when a new form, relatively new in the sense that it's not a new technology, but new in the sense that it was rolled out in mass.
At the same time.
Yes. Yeah. Is introduced in an environment, and that can present those complications. But what's also really interesting is the LA Times put out an article in 1988. The article was titled Loss of Taste and Smell Related to the Common Cold or something like this, right? And the article goes on to describe how a lot of people who experience the common cold or the flu experience loss of taste and smell. And of course, like people would respond, well, this is different. And I don't deny that. Like my wife lost her taste and smell for like 6 months and had this like almost mechanical smell that she would smell sometimes. Like it was a really weird, like synthetic thing.
Everything smelled fake and synthetic, chemical. It was like a chemical smell.
That's exactly what she said too. But what's interesting in this LA Times article is it goes on to say that a lot of people who experience the common cold or the flu are showing up 6 months after losing their taste and smell and still have not regained it. And some people were not quite sure if they will ever regain their taste and smell. Point being is that like even this is not a new phenomenon. Right. What was new is that so many people were inundated with messaging of you will experience loss of taste and smell, plus the rollout of technology that can result in olfactory dysfunction at the same time. I think that created a perfect storm for the increased prevalence of this phenomenon.
Yeah. And also just the fact that we weren't even allowed to talk about it just reemphasizes the likelihood that that's a key component of it.
Yeah.
The rollout of the technology.
Yeah, the rollout of Sync-O-G. Like we were having to come up with like code words to even describe it, which is wild to me.
Yeah. So anything that suppressed our voice and was like, you can't talk about that, then it was like, okay, we're hovering it over the answer.
Yeah, I got to look into this a little bit more. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for being here. Is there anything else you want to share, get into as we're closing up?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. And do you offer anything virtually for people who can't come to Houston to see?
I do, absolutely. I work with a lot of patients online. So outside of Texas, outside of the US, I work with patients, mostly women, but anyone who's really working for foundational health, metabolic health, anything like that, for sure.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome. Thank you.